Whoever you are, whatever your doubts or convictions, wherever your sacred quest takes you. Hello. As has just been established, I appear to be losing my voice. Clearly, this is the nefarious meddling of Angremenio to be sure, which makes what follows a brazen act of supernatural defiance. Some things never change. The past is about as set in stone as anything can be, and that's where I'd like us to venture today. In his book Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari says, quote, "We study history not to know the future, but to widen our horizons, to understand that our present situation is neither natural nor inevitable, and that we consequently have many more possibilities before us than we can imagine." End quote. It's from the past, from our ancestors, that humans have acquired their quirks of psychology. It's useful to study human behavior today and to ask people what they believe and why they believe it. But for a fuller understanding of why people do what they do and why people think the way they think, we have to look to history. All for the greater good, obviously. Know thyself, and the truth shall set you free. Or something. What I find so fascinating about studies into anthropology and human cultural evolution are not the many, many beautiful differences between people, but the similarities. Certain quirks of human nature, certain emotions and thoughts, behavior patterns, grammatical laws, and basic intuitions are universal. This set of attributes that spans all cultures and time periods practically define what it is to be a human. That these characteristics have been preserved across history to such an uncanny degree tells us that upbringing, education, and family values rely on human nature without giving rise to it. Culture may just be the superficial surface layer we use to cooperate with each other and interpret what's going on. Think of it like the colourful sugar coating on an M&M. The variable bit on the surface that we can see is not the bulk of what it is to be a human being. This cultural sugarcoat can be used to distinguish between different people and give us an identity. But there's so much more going on underneath that unites rather than divides us. Language might claim a larger share of humanity's chocolatey core. There's no doubt that we possessed senses and brains to perceive things long before we developed words to chat about them. As emergent products of underlying mental processes, cross-cultural studies of grammar and language formation offer glimpses into the structure of our thoughts, the universal ways that all human brains perceive the world. Swearing, cursing, and taboo words can teach us a lot about our underlying emotional hardware. And investigations into innuendo, subtext, and comedy can explain a number of complex social interactions from the brain's point of view. Linguistic research has already delivered on all of these fronts. See the work of Steven Pinker for details. The field of psycholinguistics continues to uncover many more innate and unchanging concepts that are embedded within all human languages. Even the way that language is acquired when we're children suggests that our brains come pre-installed with an appreciation of physics, space, matter, time, and causality. An alien visitor, unfamiliar with everyday earthly experiences or the expressions that we've come up with to reflect on them, could still infer a lot about humanity by the ways that we use language. This otherworldly observer would quickly conclude that all humanity share a common intuitive understanding of the physical world. People identify locations in space, represent continuous and discrete clumps of matter, and can even reference moments in the past and future, despite time itself being an abstract concept. And because our natural intuitions correspond more with goals and purposes than what is objectively true, the visiting alien would note that we are irresistibly inclined to assign a responsibility to cause and effect. We discussed the triumph and curse of intuitive agency detection in the last episode. Today, we need to consider that humanity's cognitive equipment allows people to agree on aspects of reality, but only relative to some frame of reference. If we didn't have such a touchstone or a point of convergence, then we would have to guess at another's perspective on the fly. For example, water can be spilt or poured depending on the intention. Countries can be invaded or liberated depending on who you ask. And a piece of property can be confiscated or redistributed depending on whose moral authority we're questioning. It really is a headache, as human ideas usually arrive steeped in emotions that overcome our ability to reason clearly. So, how might people overcome all this confusion? How do we find common ground, shared landmarks in our inner experiential lives that allow us all to navigate and communicate together? By providing a one-size-fits-all, holistic reference framework, religions create highly cooperative and agreeable societies. Until about 5,000 years ago, the human race lived in anarchy, essentially, without any form of centralized government. But that was a blink of the eye compared to the 2 million-year expanse of human history. Even small tribal communities of hunter-gatherers would have struggled to organize themselves without some arbitrary laws to bind them. The architecture of our social brains not only gives humans some innate grammatical rules to play with, but some inbuilt cognitive biases that make personification practically effortless. When faced with the unknown, attributing agency to explain unpredictable events gives comfort and meaning, at least to the survivors. That meaning reliably reflects the values and lifestyles of cultures that adopt them. For the sake of right here and now, comfort, meaning, lifestyles, and values are what I mean by a religion. So, with this religion firmly established, the subjective values of a particular culture can be transmitted far and wide. Religion as a mechanism for propagating cultural beliefs actually makes some predictions. There are anthropological reasons to expect, and empirical reasons to support, that desert cultures tend to invent monotheistic religions, while rainforest dwellers stick with polytheistic ones. Nomadic cultures naturally expect war and honor to be rewarded with a good afterlife, while agriculturalists conjure gods who control the weather. Large individualist cultures with scores of singular interactions between strangers depend on moralizing gods to police human affairs. So, by providing a few general rules, people brains don't just generate the predictable variations in local languages, but also in religious beliefs. We can sketch out a rough timeline. Animist religions came first. Animism does not generally regard humans as special or separate from the rest of the natural world. It invokes immaterial spirits of animals and natural phenomena like mountains and trees and thunderstorms to explain interactions. In this view, supernatural forces ought to be respected even though they do not deliberately dictate anything. Humans just move among them. Ideas like damnation and salvation, heaven and hell, are conspicuously rare in animist cultures. Farming required a fresh ensemble of colourful gods. With the advent of agriculture, human movements were much more restricted, and a premium was put on environmental predictability. So the acknowledgement of gods that could be appeased to boost a harvest, eradicate diseases, and soothe the hardships of this new lifestyle went down a treat. Just as humans could tame animals, and were therefore better than animals, distinct from the rest of nature, so the gods directed human fortunes, existing outside of our world and being better than us in many desirable ways. It's interesting that in these polytheistic religions, involving many gods all working in concert, natural goings-on were explained by conflicts between immortal, immaterial personalities. There was still no moralizing, remember, no supreme good to decide right from wrong. The gods just did what they did, and humanity was often swept up in the drama. Yet polytheism gave rise to a hierarchical view of nature. Just like the domestic animals below us, humans were often helpless victims in the petty affairs of more powerful beings above. As civilizations grew larger, people could enforce ever stricter hierarchies of power. As technology improved, a minority of growers and farmers could be tasked with producing food for the many, and bureaucrats could be assigned to oversee each societal tier. Conditions were ripe for a monotheistic god to step in and sit on top like a king. Really, very like a king indeed, and arriving in human history at about the same time as kingdoms. Kings are far from dispassionate. Any worthy ruler ought to show an interest in the lives of his people. This idea made common sense, as God also helped quench a growing thirst for justice. With populations and trade routes expanding, one-time interactions between unrelated strangers became increasingly frequent. Opportunistic crimes got harder and harder to prevent or penalize. So, by peddling stories of a benevolent, moral God, the largest civilizations could install an irrefutable code of conduct. Suddenly all transgressions would be detected, recorded, and punished with absolute certainty and astonishing severity. Without these righteous monotheistic beliefs to safeguard our altruism, cooperative enterprises would have stopped paying off pretty quickly. For all the good that they do in promoting social behaviors like trust and self-sacrifice, most, if not all religions, demand public displays of devotion. My guess as to why this might be is the same reason that animals display their fitness to mates and rivals. By broadcasting the sincerity of our faith, we simultaneously advertise an intention to cooperate. Public feasts, personal offerings, and extravagant rituals gather anonymous strangers into neat moral bundles, united under a common supernatural governance. These communities would have been far more successful than smaller, more turbulent groups, still limited by kinship and tit-for-tat transactions. By outcompeting others for resources, assimilating conquered peoples, and efficiently propagating their beliefs, a few powerful religions saw their myths superficially validated in a cycle of positive feedback. Whatever the reason, I suspect that the answer lies in human psychology, not in objective truth. No matter what you believe, it's clear that truth is unnecessary for religious success. I mean, there are a lot of religions out there making incompatible claims, so at least some of them must be a little wide of the mark. What matters is the solidarity that these shared beliefs foster. That's what keeps people working together, trusting each other, and fighting alongside one another. So it's no great surprise that those who reject such a collaborative enterprise would be seen as a threat to fairness and honesty. Atheists were always going to be anathema to all of that good, wholesome camaraderie. Why would an unbeliever who expects no supernatural surveillance or post-mortem justice not act purely in their own selfish interest? Despite the flourishing of modern secular societies, who sustain cooperation with courts, police, and other social institutions, widespread intolerance of atheism still persists to this day. The superstitious intuition that people behave better if they think God is scrutinizing them is a tough one to overcome. The philosopher John Locke said as much in his letter concerning toleration. Quote, "Those are not at all to be tolerated who deny the being of a God. Promises, convents, and oaths, which are the bonds of human society, can have no hold upon an atheist." End quote. The first monotheistic religions were largely faith-based, by which I mean that they didn't require specific personal beliefs. Modern religions actually became more humanistic when they swapped trust in general activities that benefit everyone for a personal relationship with one God over another. This subjective faith now testifies to an individual's moral conscience, even though it can be used to justify pretty much anything the believer likes. As soon as society placed a greater value on inner worship than ritual observance, people realized that they can in fact control their own fates. Perhaps this is why monotheism seems to be slowly stepping aside for humanism today. While theologians continue to grapple with the enigmatic and uncomfortable claims of scriptures, all major religions reluctantly have to evolve with the spirit of the age. Christianity, which has had redemption at its core from conception, has been utterly transformed by the humanistic mission of continuous self-improvement. It takes trained biblical scholars and historians to work out what was actually being said at the beginning and to pick off all the cultural decoration that Christianity has acquired along the way. The imaginative abilities of religious thinkers will never prevent the advance of scientific understanding, nor can they resist the accelerating cultural change going on all around them. Nor will they allow us to dispense of supernatural beliefs altogether. Insofar as humanity's progress can be measured at all, it's through the collective efforts of innumerable cooperating individuals, with no specific goal, god, or destination in mind. This makes it difficult to argue that Homo sapiens, as a species, are improving in any meaningful way. It's only our knowledge and our understanding that improves. History has taught us that it's impossible to knowingly hold a bad idea. The moment you recognize that your beliefs are irrational or daft, you can't help but let them go. The problem is that not everyone is equally good at recognizing a bad idea. Even if someone is able to intellectualize, rationalize, argue, debate, and smell the logical fallacy from a mile away, they can still convince themselves of anything they want. And the person who can justify their own emotional hunches can persuade other people of a flawed idea too. The architecture of our human brains and the confirmation biases this creates produce an open market for beliefs that defy logic or reason. But as with every other wiggle soup I've recorded, please, please, please don't take my word for it. If we've learned anything on our journey together so far, it's that bad ideas flourish in the absence of self-reflection. Remain skeptical. Criticize every aspect of an idea before accepting it. This may be the only reliable quality control procedure available to us. When someone else tries to sell you a new idea, even if it sounds great, attempt to smash it with rebuttals, because the truth has nothing to fear from honest investigation. Here endeth the lesson. With all that said, I should reiterate that knowing the origin of a belief says nothing at all about whether the belief is true. So next episode, I'll give my reasons for why skepticism and agnosticism should be the default position, not belief until proven otherwise.